All right, everybody, welcome to this episode of Vertcoin Talk. This is episode 13, and today I have James and Gertjaap. They are live from Boston. They are both joining us today to go over some pretty technical topics here surrounding 51% attacks, double spins, and a lot of other topics that we're going to go over today. So, guys, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Yep. So the first thing that we're going to get into, we're going to talk about what is a 51% attack. Again, we have done a talk on this before, going pretty in depth, but just give a brief overview of what that is, and then let's dive into kind of what a double spend is as well.
Okay. So we did a fairly extensive talk about 51% attacks, like somewhere in July, I think. And what essentially a 51% attack is that a miner obtains enough hash rate to make up more than half of the network hash rate. And what this essentially allows him to do is to outpace the blockchain, mining blocks that nobody else sees, whilst maintaining like the most work blockchain, which essentially results in at the time the attacker decides to publish the blocks that he mined in private, the blocks he mined becomes the new longest chain, and all the network nodes will automatically decide to follow his chain and discard all the blocks that have been mined since his attack started. And there's one additional problem to that, is the fact that nobody can actually detect that the attack is ongoing until the moment that the blocks get published. And from that moment on, whatever happened between the start of the attack and the release of the blocks is effectively erased. Which doesn't necessarily mean that every transaction that happened in that period has become invalid, because they still have valid signatures. So you can still mine them in a future block, but usually attackers are smart enough to also include them in the blocks in order to reap the rewards of the transaction fees associated. So he can decide which transactions go in the block and which don't go in the block, but he cannot decide to sort of reroute funds that you send from your wallet, because he cannot produce a transaction that's valid that sends the coin somewhere else. He can just decide not to include the transaction.
And one of the things you talked about was the amount of work. So a lot of people may think, oh, well, if I have a really small block time, then it's, as long as I got more blocks on my chain, then it's all good. And that's not exactly what proof of work, what it is. It's really, the amount of hashing times time, correct?
Yeah. So in proof of work blockchains, there's a concept called difficulty. And in the Vertcoin blockchain specifically, that adjusts every block, which leads to the fact that you can have a shorter chain in terms of number of blocks, but is the result of more work. So because the difficulty on the private mine chain adjusts upwards, because there's more hash power, for instance, than on the main chain, then it will adjust in a way that there's still one block every 2.5 minutes. That's the idea of difficulty adjustment. Mm-hmm. But because the difficulty is higher, the blocks are worth more in terms of total work. And so if you put this in extreme, like let's say somebody has 10 times the hash power of the main chain, then if you would start mining in private, it doesn't emit 10 times more blocks. The blocks are just 10 times more difficult. And so as soon as you release those blocks to the rest of the world, they will not look at how deep the chain is, like how long in terms of blocks, but it will look at the cumulative amount of work that's been done to produce it. And if that's higher than the main chain, even if that's ahead like 10 blocks in terms of numbers, it will still win.
Okay. So let's go into kind of what a double spend is. So we keep hearing this term thrown around whenever anything as far as a 51% attack or any attack really on any sort of cryptocurrency. It's normally associated with the word double spend. So go into who is affected by that and kind of what that is exactly.
Yeah, so ultimately, proof of work, it comes down to this fact that we don't have a central authority to decide what the current state of the system is. So proof of work is being used analogously to voting. So the amount of power and energy you consume is equivalent to how many votes you have in the system. And the difficulty adjustment is about deciding how many voters there are in total in the system. So in terms of a double spend, all that's happening here is someone is coming along with more votes than the entire system combined, and is then saying, well, I vote that this transaction should be included. And what that can do is overwrite a previous transaction that spent the same coins. And that's what a double spend is, where you present one state of the system with a lot of votes behind it to a portion of the network, which spends the coins to one location, and then you present another state of the system with an even larger amount of votes behind it that spends those same coins to a different location. The assumption being that the person who you're paying in the first case ships you the product or sends you the coins that you've purchased or whatever it is. And after that has occurred, you then effectively reverse the transaction. It's like tying a coin to a piece of string and putting it in a vending machine, waiting for your chocolate bar to come out and then pulling the coin back out again. It's exactly the same as that.
And this really affects not individuals who are transferring funds across the blockchain necessarily. This is more large holders such as exchanges, correct?
That's right. It's generally targeted. So if you're not the target of the double spend or the 51% attack, you will likely not notice that anything happened per se, unless you were specifically paying attention to the blockchain at that time, because your transaction, if you're not the one being attacked, will just get into the other side of the fork. So what generally happens is it's likely an exchange or some large merchant that gets attacked, where it's targeted in that the person deposits a large amount of coins, then withdraws those coins from the exchange, and then double spends the initial deposit transaction. So they end up with their initial deposited coins as well as the withdrawn coins. And since on exchanges, coins are not federated between certain users, you're effectively stealing from the global pool of funds that the exchange keeps.
Okay, so yeah, that kind of talks about, we talked about you can't really detect this because it's done in private, and then you see it once they publish the blocks. And then we've also talked about, kind of the incentive for these attackers is really to create funds or to take funds, steal funds away from someone like an exchange, where they can target that person individual, or target the exchange because they know they carry a large sum of funds in order to interact with all of the transactions of everybody who's trading the coin on their exchanges. Why is Vertcoin susceptible to these attacks? And can you dive into what makes us not necessarily why have we gotten attacked, and it's been very publicized, where we've seen some 51% attacks happen to other chains, but it doesn't really get that much steam. So why would go ahead?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't have the answer to that question because that's purely subjective on why would you cover a particular story. I think part of what happened was like the Coinbase article about what happened in the 51% attacks, because it seemed like that article went back further than just this last incident, where they looked at like all the double spends that happened during the year and assumed that it was more or less the same attacker pulling off a similar trick on multiple instances, which I don't think you can prove, but so, and that got picked up pretty well by other news outlets and on Twitter. And then after that, a lot of other crypto journals and magazines started publishing articles about basically the same same things.
Copying and pasting, basically, yeah.
Well, not, I wouldn't say copy and pasting, but like, they got the news from the same source.
Yeah.
And wrote their own, vision on what happened, and try to, make us make a case on how important this is or what this proves or disproves. And I think we always been very like open about the fact that Vertcoin is a proof of work blockchain with comparatively low hash rate compared to like Bitcoin or Litecoin. And like ever since that Crypto 51 website was released, which caused quite a stir in, you know, making visible how easy it actually is to perform these attacks by giving it a price label, saying, okay, like you need this amount of hash power to do a 51% attack, is sort of diffuse to like what it entails. But if you say this takes you like $500 an hour or $1,000 an hour, then people think, hey, that's weird. That's like really cheap, and you know, I don't need much capital to like run an attack. Whereas, like for Bitcoin or Litecoin, there's not even that much hash power for rent. So you have to like have a huge actor, like a big miner in the system, or even multiple miners collude with each other to like act maliciously and perform the same attack. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's, you know, not everybody has like the means to do the attack. And I mean, it's it happened. I think it happened like since the Crypto 51 app was launched. I think they went from top to bottom. So they started with like Bitcoin Gold, which was like 18 million was lost in a double spend. So that was like way more money than happened all year in Vertcoin. But somehow, yeah, this is now bigger news. I don't know why that is, but yeah.
Yeah, but in terms of why Vertcoin is specifically susceptible, as Gertjaap alluded to earlier, it comes down to this fact that we're quite a small hash rate coin relative to other coins. So ultimately, in order to be, you know, as secure as Bitcoin is from 51% attacks, you need to be the largest hash rate coin in your particular mining class. And when I say mining class, that means you need to be the biggest GPU coin, or the biggest CPU coin, or the biggest coin for a particular ASIC implementation. So obviously Bitcoin is very secure because it's by far the largest SHA-256 mined cryptocurrency.
Yep.
But Vertcoin, we have several competitors that use the same algorithm as us. So Monocoin has a hash rate that's just over twice as and fluctuates. But what that means is that if you just take into account the Monocoin hash rate, a very small portion of that hash rate needs to move over to Vertcoin in order to perform a 51% attack. Now, if you include all GPUs globally, so that includes all the GPUs that are mining Ethereum and Monero and various other cryptocurrencies, you start to realize how small Vertcoin's network hash rate is in total. So the reason why these attacks are possible is because rental services have reduced the fixed cost of being a miner to effectively zero. So you can purchase as much hash rate as you want for a very short period of time, you know, order of 10 minutes, for only the cost, you know, the marginal cost of that hash rate. And that's what makes us so susceptible. The demand for hash rate is very low, and the supply is very high.
So one thing I would ask is, you know, so a lot of people may be asking, you know, what can I do to protect myself? So what type of safeguards can you take when to prevent a 51% attack? And I guess really, since these are targeted towards exchanges, really the people who really need to put up safeguards are going to be the exchanges or these big merchants that are accepting vast quantities of Vertcoin in a single transaction. What would be a recommended way to avoid these types of pitfalls with a lower hash rate coin?
You want to take it?
Yeah, so I think the key point is people have forgotten that proof-of-work cryptocurrencies provide probabilistic finality. This is, you know, two very big words, but what I mean by that is it means that unlike when you make a transaction with your credit card, there's a point at which the transaction no longer gets reversed. Now you can say there's chargebacks and what have you that make that, you know, not quite true, but for the most part, you know, when you pay with your credit card, it's final as soon as you pay. With cryptocurrency, the probability that a transaction is reversed reduces to zero over time, but it never quite reaches zero. So even if the entire universe elapsed the probability of your transaction getting reversed would be very, very small, but it would be non-zero. And because people are not considering that, especially exchanges, what they've done is selected fixed amount of confirmations for each currency in order to consider a payment to be final, which does not take into account this probability issue. So one thing they can do is try to manage their risk. Look at how much it costs to 51% attack a particular coin, as well as how much their liabilities are, i.e. how many deposits are outstanding currently for that exchange, and then manage globally how many confirmations they require in order to accept that deposit to outweigh the cost of attack. Now, this doesn't solve a malicious attacker who's just trying to attack the coin for, not profit. They're just trying to attack to destroy the network. In that case, obviously, you can't make a strong economic argument. But in this case, it seems the attacks are to make money. And so by making the cost of attack more than the potential gain from that attack, you could negate most of the incentive.
So it's something kind of like an automatic adjustment of confirmations based upon the amount of funds that are currently either being deposited or withdrawn. Would that be something that kind of makes sense? So obviously if somebody's only sending over 15 Vertcoin to an exchange, you don't necessarily need to wait 600 or however many confirmations in order to accept that, given the small quantity of Vertcoin that is. But if somebody's sending, 50,000 Vertcoin, obviously that's going to raise a little bit more cautionary, you need to take a little bit more caution to make sure that you're not going to be susceptible to this type of double spend.
That's right. And I think the other glaring hole is around know your customer regulations. So the exchanges that tend to get attacked are ones that have no know your customer regulations. Now, you could say this is good from a sort of libertarian freedom perspective, but from the exchange's perspective, it means that when they do get attacked and they lose money, they do not know who attacked them. And thus, they don't know who to report to law enforcement. So exchanges that have strong KYC regulations, who know who their customers are much less likely to be attacked, as long as their KYC regulations are up to scratch and they're not letting false identities onto their service.
Yeah, because I assume if you have the KYC, then no matter what address it comes from, it's going to that account. So you would know who is responsible, unless the hacker also hacked somebody who had an account that had KYC and all the, all these other things that, it would be hard to kind of prevent all of that. If somebody's going through that much work and that much effort, it's kind of hard to have a single point of, this is how you would stop it. But yeah.
But it's about deterrence, right? If you're an easy target, if you're only waiting 2 confirmations for any deposit value and you have no KYC, then of course you're going to get attacked because there's no risk, because there's no chance of any consequences coming on the attacker.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think the timing also of the latest one, it was right after we did our November dev update. So I did that Vertcoin Talk, and we were talking about Layer 2 Rev 3, advancements on Verthash, and kind of how we are trying to get the ASICs off of our network, and also trying to completely eliminate the concept of using a rent a hash attack system like something like NiceHash. And directly after that is when we started seeing the double spends. And I'm wondering if sometimes if we get targeted simply because we are so steadfast in our belief of that, everybody should be able to mine the coin simply with, consumer grade hardware and not requiring any sort of specialized hardware like ASICs and such. That's I thought the timing was pretty interesting that happened relatively soon after we gave that talk. So let's see. Let's talk about, so what type of effect does 51% attack or a double spender, taking over this network have on miners? And then what is the team doing to prevent this in the future?
Yeah, I think the effect like in general, mining is like a competitive game, right? Where you have to find a solution to a puzzle and then propagate it to the network, more than half of the network, fastest. And there's always the chance that 2 people find a block at the same time. And, they can lose the rewards for their work because somebody else beat them to the punch, essentially. And now what happens with with the reorg that we saw recently is two things. So one, if there's a reorg of a bunch of blocks, then everybody that found the other blocks are essentially robbed of their reward because somebody else is taking it in their place. What we saw recently is significant in the sense that the reorg was 300 blocks deep, and if you find new coins, if you find the block, you cannot spend the coins that you found for 110 blocks, I think, or 100 blocks, at least like a lot of blocks. And what mining pools use that for is to say, if you like mine on our pool and you found shares of the block that we found, then you're getting, credits, right? You get credited an amount of coins that you can usually withdraw after 120 blocks. And so I think the mining pools were also sort of duped in the fact that they paid out mining shares to miners that mined their pool on blocks that eventually disappeared from the blockchain, and therefore they're at a loss essentially. Mm-hmm. Unless they paid those rewards from those Coinbase rewards, because then those transactions would also have become invalid, and then the actual miners would have lost their money.
It comes back to this idea of federation of funds, and I think exchanges could benefit from this as well. If user funds were segregated rather than put into a big pile, that would solve a lot of the issues. Because if you're only able to withdraw from your pool of funds, then double spending would actually be impossible for the exchange, because, or at least the method that currently seems to take place where you deposit and then withdraw and then reverse the deposit transaction would not be possible.
Because they don't exchange them?
No, there's no need. You just deposit,
okay,
hit withdraw, wait for the withdrawal transaction to get broadcast, include that in your chain, and then reorg. Don't need to do any exchange or anything.
Yeah, so it's all basically in one wallet.
I mean, right? It's easy to mitigate by just exchanging it for Bitcoin first and then withdrawing those.
At least it would solve the problem for mining pools, definitely, and part of the problem for exchanges. And I think federation of user funds is just a sensible concept anyway. It will certainly give people a lot more confidence that their coins are their coins and the exchange isn't running fractional reserve on their assets.
Have any exchanges talked to you about implementing something like that, or is that kind of a new concept that's being thrown around in the space right now?
I think, we've spoken to a number of exchanges about solutions, but most aren't willing for what they deem to be operational reasons. So I think, we're not clear on how it works internally at all these exchanges, but they must have some reason for not wanting to implement these policies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know perhaps it could just be they don't want to put in the effort there. They'd rather put effort into some other items that are going to make them more funds over time, and they're just taking they're taking into account the possibility of risk, and they're just accepting that as part of doing business. That might be...
I think that's what it is.
Yeah. So what is the team doing in order to prevent this in the future? And I'm wondering if this is where kind of Rev 2 or Layer 2, Rev 3, and Verthash is coming into play.
So it's pretty tough, right? Because it's really hard to get around this problem of someone having the majority of the votes in the system. By the very nature of how proof of work works, if someone shows up with the majority of the hash rate, you have to agree with what they have to say. That is the rule of the network. So the only real long-term solution is for Vertcoin's network hash rate to increase drastically. Now, what we can do is try and make it fairer so that people are able to mine, and so that we can increase the network hash rate. So I think that's what Lyra 2RE v3 is all about, is removing the ASICs that are currently on the network so that individuals can mine Vertcoin again and contribute to the network hash rate, distributing it away from the larger miners with ASICs that are currently seem to be performing 51% attacks. But ultimately, it comes down to being the majority coin in your mining class.
Mm-hmm. So you think something like where Ethereum has talked time and time again, I don't know if they'll ever do it, talked about going to proof of stake, thus eliminating the proof of work aspect of their coin, that obviously would be a great benefit to us as far as GPU miners coming over to a coin that's dedicated to GPU mining. do you think something like that would benefit us, especially, you know, it would increase our hash rate greatly?
It's possible, but chances are they would go to other coins. So I think we have to work hard to make mining really easy for people so that they are encouraged to come to Vertcoin.
Mm-hmm.
But the big problem is ultimately NiceHash and the fact that the fixed cost of mining is so low. So looking long term, we're looking into mining algorithms that can increase that fixed cost in a way that makes blind outsourcing of your network, of your hash rate, very difficult, but does not overly penalize normal miners of the network.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, we still want everybody who has a GPU and wants to mine to be able to do it and not do it at basically with no, I guess, reward necessarily for the work that they're putting in. So that's definitely the goal, is to still have that at the forefront and not just eliminating the rent a hash. You still want to make it beneficial for the average miner too.
Yeah, Vertcoin's network is always going to be strongest when it's profitable for people to mine, and that is not the case right now.
Yeah.
You know, there needs to be an incentive for people to mine, otherwise people won't mine. And right now that incentive is low enough such that, you know, if you're clever enough to figure out how to use NiceHash's market in an efficient way, you can actually make a decent amount of money. But that is out of the reach of the vast majority of our target audience.
Yep.
And it's not something they should be expected to do.
So I'm going to throw this over to Gert. What is notarization, and how does it protect against these types of attacks?
Yeah, so this is interesting. So what notarization does is effectively introduce a mechanism in which you can learn from an external source which of the chains is the one to follow. So what would essentially happen is while the blockchain is doing its normal business, there would be external entities looking at the blockchain and saying, okay, I see this block that's like buried 10 blocks deep. I'm going to do some form of notarization saying that this block is on like the honest chain. And so what other nodes do is they look at that sort of trusted source and say, okay, if you say that this is the right block, then I won't accept anybody that tells me that this block is somehow gone, which results in the fact that you cannot reorg past a notarized block, which seems like a very effective solution because, you know, you can sort of assume that once a transaction is 10 blocks deep, there's no way to reorg it out because like the notaries will never say a new block was the valid one because this one is notarized. And, you know, if for whatever reason we would want the notarization to be changed, there's notaries that we can contact and say, hey, listen, there's something screwed up. We have to like notarize a different chain. That's possible, which is like a very weird power to have. So essentially, the Vertcoin nodes would still determine which blocks are valid. Only the notaries would tell you which blocks to follow and which to ignore, essentially. So if an attacker comes along, the notaries would also have to aid him in his attack, which they normally wouldn't do. But yeah, so the problem I have with systems like that, and I think like checkpointing falls in the same category, only it's done by different people, is you essentially trust someone to tell you which blocks are the ones you should honor and which are the ones you should discard. And that's not how proof of work was supposed to work. So it's a mitigation against this like attack vector on proof of work, but I think it deducts very much from the decentralized, open, permissionless nature that it's supposed to have.
Yeah, I think if we're going to have a system that's dictated by notaries, it should be a system that's dictated by notaries, right? That should be the goal of the system, and that should be honest about the way it works. Whereas the goal of Vertcoin is very much to be a decentralized proof of work cryptocurrency, and I don't see that changing going into the future.
Yeah, no doubt, and I think also with notaries, you got to look at, you know, it's normally a very few number of notaries, and it's a select group of people that have that, and essentially that is centralizing the authority around the project. And, you know, at that point, why it's no different kind of than Visa. You know, you have that central authority that says this is a valid transaction, right?
It's somewhat different in the sense that, like the normal blockchain would still maintain the ledger. But like the risk of proof of work is there can at some point be two ledgers. And proof of work has a system to decide which of the two ledgers is the valid one, which means it's the one with the most work. And with a notary system, you're basically changing the selection of which of the ledgers is valid, or which of the ledgers is the ones you should consider the correct one.
It changes it from the most work to the most work, but only if it's endorsed.
Yeah.
And then the question comes in, who selects who the notaries are? Most systems that have some kind of notarization system, it's generally a small clique of well-connected individuals in the project.
Yeah, definitely. And
other solutions have made masternodes, which are almost exactly the same thing, except you generally pay to become one. So it's permissioned in a different way. Rather than being permissioned based on, you know, your rapport within a given community, it's permissioned based on how much money you have to spend.
Yeah. I mean, they essentially function the same way, right? It's just how you get access to controlling it is what's different.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think the key difference between notarization and masternodes is that masternodes also create the blocks, right?
Yeah.
Or is that?
I think it depends on the design.
Yeah, but I think like the key distinction that people that talk about notarization make is that they say the blockchain is still the blockchain. So there's there's your nodes, there's your miners. They decide which transactions are valid. They decide which blocks are valid. They mine the blocks. Only at some point they get notarized in order to prevent them from being reversed. And yeah, I mean, in proof of work, blocks can be reversed. That's a feature of the system, I guess. And yeah, I guess notarization is a way to get rid of it, and checkpointing is also a way to get rid of it. Only it comes at a price of, you're trusting somebody else to, stamp the blocks that are the ones that you should look at.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's see. I wanted to pull up here. I got a nice little site that you have made that is what we have on the URL dspin.org/VTC. So this is a site that actually it indicates double spins, the addresses used, and you developed this, right? So can you give everybody kind of an idea of what they're seeing here? Because I got this pulled up on the screen now.
Okay.
What we're seeing and how we went about developing this and kind of a use case for it.
Yeah, so I think it was almost like a year ago, I developed a like blockchain indexer, which was supposed to be sort of the basis for either a block explorer or maybe an Electrum type server or something like that, only way faster. And the reason that it was faster is it wasn't, it's not calling the Vertcoin core client to retrieve block data, but it actively reads the block files that Vertcoin writes by like looking in the files and extracting the blocks. And what I learned is that if you run a full node, it'll write every block it ever receives into that. Like if it validates the block, it will write it into the block files. And so if you run a full node during a double spend or during a 51% attack, you will have both sides of the chain as part of your block archive. And so I mean, recently I started it when, like in the summer, there was a smaller double spend, or at least a smaller reorg, to sort of write a small analysis routine that would look in both chains and then try to figure out which of the UTXOs was double spent, which is fairly easy to do because you can just, check if the transactions are there in both sides of the chain, and then the result of that analysis is basically what you see. And I'm not, it's a work in progress. I'm not 100% sure that this is fully accurate, but I'm fairly confident that it is. And so what it shows you here is like the hash of the block in the main chain, and the hash of the block in the orphaned chain, and the transaction ID in both. And both these transactions, even though they're different transaction IDs, spend the same output. And so this is how an attacker performs a double spend. They send a transaction to somebody that they want to make believe that they receive money. And then later, in order to get the money back, you have to spend it to yourself. Because otherwise, the transaction that you send it to the merchant is still valid. So even if you don't include it in a block on your privately mined chain, somebody else could pull it from an orphan block and just put it in the memory pool. Or I think even the Vertcoin core client does that by itself. If a transaction disappears from the chain, it will go back into the memory pool because it's still a valid transaction. So you have to invalidate that transaction by spending it again. And this basically shows you spend 1, spend 2, and how much was spent. Obviously, there's things like change outputs, and you don't know 100% sure which of the two is to spend, but usually it's like the biggest amount or the rounded amount. And there's another thing that I tried to figure out, but it's not something that happened. Is like if you have a mining reward, that's also an output that will disappear if you reorg the chain. And so if you include that in a transaction, then that would also invalidate the transaction without the need to actually double spend it.
So that's how they're able to take that. Well, I was about to say that's how they could take all the mining rewards in that reorg as well, right?
No, they already take all the mining rewards in the reorg. Okay. It's just that like a Coinbase output. So if you mine as an attacker, you also mine a block on the main chain that you're going to reorg out, and you use that as an input to the transaction to the exchange, for instance, then you don't have to double spend it, because the transaction spending to the exchange will become invalid because the input, like the Coinbase input, will disappear if you reorg. So I think I'm explaining a more efficient way to defraud an exchange, which may be not a good idea. Okay, but it didn't happen, because the reason that I looked at it is the following: that like the latest double spend, the one that everybody made a big fuss about, I couldn't find evidence of more than like 10 or 11,000 Vertcoin being double spent, which is
far less than $100,000.
It seems to be uneconomical towards having to 51% attack 300 blocks. So that's why I thought maybe there's something that we're missing. Maybe there's still something that we're missing. But at least, I mean, the fact that I like built the Explorer in order to sort of grind through the blockchain data gave me a nice platform to sort of do this investigation. And maybe, you know, if there's other things that we can look at, then it's easy to use this as a basis for doing that.
And did you notice that when these double spends happen, you know, they're going to an address, and normally you can look at that address and see if it's going to send another. Do they move those coins around, or do they kind of just sit like after the double spend?
Yeah, so that was another interesting thing that I found, is that there was like a series of double spends where the double spending back to the attacker would go to the same address, and those coins would be reused in the next attack. Which would implicate that if like exchanges would exchange the information about the double spend and the output that resulted, like the coins that were gained from the double spend, they might decide to be very cautious if those coins reach their exchange. Mm-hmm. Like if they see that those outputs are coming towards their exchange, they might say, well, maybe, you know, I do some manual verification here, or I wait a bit longer, or, but, you know, yeah, as an attacker, that's easily fixable by using either coin mixers or something. I mean, it's very it's very easy to make coins very hard to track. But in this case, they didn't do much effort to hide the fact that they were continuously attacking from the same address.
Well, normally I would imagine that people wouldn't put in a lot of effort in order to hide these things if they think that this can't be tracked in some way, or at least investigated in some sort of way. And the fact that you're able to simply just using the blockchain data to put, one and one together and try and figure out exactly where these addresses are doing this double spend, where the coins are going, because it does get published to the public block once they finish their 51% attack in private. I'm hoping that maybe some exchanges will actually look at this idea and use some of this information in order to protect themselves and against attacks like this in the future. It sucks because you can't tell when a 51% attack is happening until they publish all of those orphan blocks. I mean, you can go to a hash rate or a block chart that shows you orphans, and where you see a big spike in orphans, that's indicative of a double spend or a 51% attack, correct?
Yeah. You don't know that it happened until the blocks are published.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or you are the attacker, then you also know what's going on. But yeah.
There's a lot of uncertainty as well, because even on this list where it says double spend, you don't know if that's a malicious double spend or someone just honestly spending the same coins again because the transaction just didn't get into the other side of the chain in a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah.
And it's impossible to tell between those two scenarios. Equally, as with the last attack, if there was no indication of a double spend, it could have been something called a selfish mining attack instead, where you effectively block out the remaining miners in order to increase your own profit. It's like getting rid of the competition effectively. So it reduces the overall difficulty that you have to mine at.
Yeah, and avoiding this, I guess the possibility of malicious actors being able to pull off these things is kind of the goal of decentralization and spreading that hash power out. Not everybody mining to one individual pool, but spreading that out to decentralized pools or a lot of different pools. That's why we keep an eye on the network to make sure that one pool isn't getting a majority of hash rate. Obviously, with the ASICs that have been out there, most of them have been sending that hash power to NiceHash, which they will use one individual pool, which kind of complicates that issue. But that's why we as a project are very in favor of decentralizing every aspect of it, so that it puts the biggest barrier that you can against malicious actors, especially. A malicious actor needs to have a substantial amount of hash power and or funds to be able to pull something like this off.
Yeah, I think we definitely need to do something to increase the incentive to behave in a decentralized way. Unfortunately, I think the tragedy of the commons has taken hold here, where people have valued convenience far above what they know is right for the coin and what is secure. So they think, oh, well, it's very convenient to use Coinatron because they have good payout system that I like, even though I know that 70% of the network hash rate is on this pool. Maybe I continue to mine there because it's not my problem. Mm-hmm. But what we've discovered is it really is your problem, and as a miner, you really need to care and take serious attention to where you're mining, how you're mining, and so on. So I think people, to a large extent, need to take a sort of introspective look at themselves and think, am I mining in the best possible way? Because ultimately, you may not think you'll lose out, but as is demonstrated, if you have a 300 block deep reorg, you really do lose out because all of your mining rewards are subsequently gone.
Yeah, no doubt. And when you're using something like NiceHash, I mean, I remember when I first started mining, I used NiceHash because I didn't know what mining was or anything like that, and it was click. It was it was sold to me that it changes profitability, so you're going to get the most out of it. You automatically get BTC. So it was easy, simple. I didn't have to think about it. I didn't even know that someone could use that maliciously. I didn't even know what mining pools were. But by doing that, you're essentially signing up your GPU or your ASICs to a rentable attack botnet, basically. I know we originally forked from one of our original algorithms because of a CPU botnet that was taking over the network, and we ended up going to GPUs only and kind of decentivizing CPUs because of that. And now we just have a third-party botnet in NiceHash. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and get to some of you guys' questions that you have been putting in here. And then hopefully we have some news surrounding the possible fork that's going to be coming up here soon that we've been talking about here with Layer 2 Rev 3. And then maybe some updates on that algorithm and or some updates on VertHash and kind of where we're going with there, since we have two of our developers here from Boston live with us. So I'm going to go back through here and look at some questions. So I'm going to go from at the very beginning of the stream and work my way down. So one question we have here from Josiah, who I believe he is an ambassador for Digibyte. He asked, what are the team's thoughts on FPGAs long-term versus ASICs? Do you think we'll see more of a shift towards higher-end consumer-grade GPUs and FPGAs and away from ASICs?
Well, I think FPGAs ultimately are not a consumer product right now. If they become a consumer product, then maybe that will change. You know, if suddenly one day every motherboard producer in the world is integrating an FPGA onto their motherboard, then you could say, sure, there's an argument for allowing FPGA mining. But right now, FPGA mining is highly specialized. You need to know, something like Verilog, which, is not something that the vast majority of people are going to learn. And then you need to get a proprietary bit stream from someone to run on that FPGA. And that's totally antithetical to how GPU mining works right now, where you have open source miners and GPU mining hardware is ubiquitous. You can walk into any computer store and buy a GPU. So until that comes about, I put FPGAs very much in the same bracket as ASICs. That doesn't mean it can't change, but right now the trajectory isn't there yet.
Okay. Let's see. Let's see. Are you guys keeping track of nodes online, uptime of the majority of nodes, and how long does it take for a node to update to a new core version? This may be useful data for future forks.
Yeah, I think we do have a node tracker somewhere.
There is one somewhere. I'm not sure if it's online at present.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, if I look at my own full node, I see that there's a large number of people that don't update their nodes. Like a whole lot of people don't update their nodes. And I mean, it used to not matter that much, in the sense that there wasn't really a reason for somebody that had 0.11 versus 0.12 to actually see different blocks. But now what we've seen with the upgrade to, I think, 0.13.3 or
13.3,
like the vulnerability that came from upstream Bitcoin, the network actually forked. So you see even block explorers like, I think, Bchain or
Bchain.info and I think BitInfo charts and a couple others.
They're stuck on like 200,000 blocks back now, and that means that if you had if you're receiving coins or something, it just doesn't work. It doesn't show up. So there's probably more incentive to upgrade now. And also for people mining, if you don't install the next hard fork, then you're not getting. It will stop updating the blockchain at the fork block, because the next block seems to have the wrong proof of work, but you're just using the wrong algorithm. And so, it might be interesting to do more analytics on the total network and see, but it's very passive. Like from the sidelines, we can see that it's happening, and we can see that there's a bunch of nodes that don't upgrade, but there's not much we can do about it other than keep telling people to upgrade their nodes.
Yeah, and I'll take this time to plug. Make sure that if you're running a version of Vertcoin Core, that it is a 0.13.3, because this is the update that included the resolve from the Bitcoin Core bug that was upstream. And it's very important that you do upgrade your wallet, because essentially if you're on a older version, all the way down I think to 0.12, right, when this I think was introduced, you are essentially on a separate chain, and that has the inflation mechanism.
But it also, it's not being mined again.
Yeah.
So miners are smart enough to upgrade because otherwise, they have coins that are worthless if they're mining on the wrong fork. So, I mean, it's not that it's progressing anymore. So it should, ring a bell if you start it up, then it'll keep saying that you're like behind. It will never say, okay, you caught up with all the blocks.
Yep.
Because the last block is from 2-3 months ago.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Cool. And to get there, you just go to our GitHub page. It's under Vertcoin Core Releases, and you can see that right here. Let's see. So can a 51% attacker change any wallet or only transactions from his or her own wallet? I think we touched on this a little bit, but it's
yeah. So we touched on it a little bit. So the only thing they can do is effectively they can change transactions from their own wallet. So they can reproduce signatures with their own keys to send the money elsewhere, but they cannot send money from your wallet elsewhere because they need your signature to send it elsewhere. So the only thing they can do is keep your transaction out of the blocks that they mine, but it will not remove the validity of your transaction.
Yeah, they can't spend your money as long as it truly is your money, right? So this doesn't count if your coins are in an exchange, because then the exchange's money can be stolen, at which point there's no money to back what are your coins. But if your money is in your private keys, the attacker cannot spend your funds if they were not already spent. All they can do is change the ordering of transactions in the system, such that one transaction that previously came before another is now reversed in such a way that the subsequent transaction is now invalid, and thus they've double spent some coins.
Cool. So another question we had here is, with a 51% attack, there is a big spike, at least double in hash. Well, it's not really double the hash, it's just a majority of the hash. Is it possible to block big spikes of hash that comes in to the Vertcoin algorithm? And I would imagine that the answer to this is no, because we're not using anything like master nodes or anything like that I
think that's not even relevant whether you use master nodes or not. The hash rate charge that you see is not the actual number of hashes that are being done on the network. I mean, we cannot see how many hashes everybody does. The hash rate on the network, like the charts, are deducted from the difficulty that's embedded in the block, and then does a calculation to say, probably this amount of hashes have been done in order to resolve this block in this amount of time. And so it's sort of more like a formula to deduce the hash rate from like the emission of blocks and the difficulty. So somebody hashing is undetectable. Like if somebody would boot up like 10 terahash of Lyra 2 RE v2 right now somewhere in the world, there's no way we know about it until there's like a block that appears or a series of blocks which makes it apparent that they were probably using this amount of hash rate to produce them.
Yeah, it comes down to, how do you prove that something does not exist? And if you think about this for a while, you realize that you would have to be able to observe everything in the universe simultaneously, right? So you want to be able to prove that no additional hash rate exists other than the hash rate that's currently on the network. And that's just impossible to do without, as I said, being omnipotent and knowing and seeing everything. So instead, the heuristic is the most work chain is the correct one. And since that truly is a heuristic, and 200 years from now, an alien race could totally show up with several orders of magnitude more hash rate than we have today, and you'd have to accept the new chain, right? Because you have no way of deciding whether that external hash rate source exists or not, and that sort of highlights the sort of almost both the innovation behind proof of work and also the flaw behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's see. So will there be two core updates, Rev 3 and VertHash? Yeah, so Rev 3 is this kind of stopgap measure that we're doing right now while we're still working on VertHash. So that will be a fork, and then once VertHash is finalized, we're ready to go with that. That will be another fork. So, some people have asked me, they said, well, what if somebody creates an ASIC for Rev 3. It's like, okay, well, good luck, because we have Verthash that's going to be right there. Hopefully, I think we're trying to set a goal of time where Verthash will be ready, so that if it takes, I know Alex and I talked about it on our last Vertcoin Talk, that if it takes a certain amount of time, roughly, to make an ASIC from the start of R&D all the way up to the manufacturing, that set amount of time is roughly what we're hoping to get to give Rev 3 before Verthash is ready to go public and do another fork.
I think it's important to understand, though, that Verthash is still very much a research and development effort.
Most definitely.
Lyra 2 REv3 will get the ASICs off the network. That is the goal of the algorithm, and it will do that for a period of months, I'm sure. And if necessary, we could create V4 and fork again and do the same thing again. Verthash is more about dealing with the nice hash issue, and that's definitely still a question mark, how to solve that, and I don't think anyone is 100% sure on what the correct pathway is yet. So that's going to take a longer period of time, and that's why V3 is coming first, because ultimately we need to increase the network hash rate, and the only way to do that is to make Vertcoin profitable to mine for people who are actually interested in Vertcoin.
Definitely. All right, cool. So I think that's about all the questions I have here. The one last thing I had here on my list is, have we, in theory, selected a block yet as far as the fork to Rev 3? And what are the stages looking like for that? So James or Gert, I'll let you take it away as far as that information.
Yeah, so some people already noticed that there's a pull request open on the Vertcoin core repository that contains a fork block, which is projected to be around the end of January. And so the reason for that timing is we wanted to give people at least a month to upgrade their node, which is already quite short notice, but probably doable. There's not like 100 exchanges where we're active. It's more limited than that. So like the timeline is, first, we're going to do a peer review on the pull request, obviously, to see if there's no weird stuff in there. Then we're going to merge it in. We're going to make a beta 2, like we made the beta 1 release, which was sort of messy because, like the standard build procedure is that James does it, but he was very busy. And so I tried making it. I released it in the Discord. It wasn't the best way to do it. So this would be like a more formal beta release from the normal build procedures, which is not just testnet fork, but also like already sets the block for the mainnet fork. Then we encourage people to like run the beta to see if they notice any weird things. Don't use it with real money, obviously. But just, play around with it. And then if nothing weird comes up also from our own tests, then the block that is in the pull request will be the block that we're also releasing as a final 0.14 release. And that's the time for people to start actually upgrading their real production nodes. Nothing will change after they upgrade. Only when we reach the fork block, then obviously the blocks that are still doing Lyra 2 RE2 proof of work will be discarded by these new nodes. I mean, we have all the miners ready to go. There's already a bunch of people mining it on testnet, which seemed to work pretty well. Then by the end of January, we hope to have like a smooth transition into V3.
The people who are going to have to work the hardest are the mining pools and the miners in this case. Exchanges and individuals, they just have to upgrade their software and everything continues as before. If you're a miner, you need to be conscious of when the fork block arrives and obviously switch to mining with the new algorithm, because otherwise you will be mining the previous version of the chain, which at least we will no longer be focusing on developing. Obviously, it's a decentralized network, so we can't make the old chain fully go away, but our direction is certainly towards Lyra 2 RE v3, so it would require someone else to step up and continue that.
Well, you mean with a decentralized network, we can't just go in there and just delete the file on the server and everything,
right?
Just goes away? I mean,
Yeah, if someone really wants to run Vertcoin Classic, there's nothing we can do to stop them.
Yeah, that's true. Now, you will, obviously not have the support of the community, the dev team, and stuff of that nature, but that's kind of how you got a lot of the other classics or of the other coins that ended up forking. But, we're hoping that this will be kind of not a shot over the bow, but, you've had plenty of projects in the past who say we're ASIC resistant, who say that we stand for these particular values, and a lot of them do not follow through with the work and the effort and the ingenuity that it takes in order to pull something like this off. And I say this a lot every time we do a Vertcoin Talk, but remember, our whole team is also volunteers. A lot of other projects are salaried employees and such, and they're still not doing this type of stuff. So I definitely want to take this time to commend our developers. I got James and Gert here with me here today. I want to commend the entire development team. If you guys see them in the Discord, you see them on Reddit, make sure to thank them for their time, for their effort, because they don't have to do this. They do this because they're very passionate about the project and the philosophy that we have behind Vertcoin. And always be not necessarily be grateful that they're here, but take into consideration that you have individuals who are putting time, very valuable time that we have limited here on this earth, towards a project for a goal of being able to have a decentralized currency that anybody with a GPU or consumer grade hardware can mine, and you can send payments across the world without having to incur large fees and go through a centralized player in the currency space. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this version of, or this episode of Vertcoin Talk. I want to thank James and Gert for joining me today from Boston. So thank you guys very much for joining. And look for our development update to come out hopefully here within the next week for the month of December. So check out, we always put a ton of information in there. We try and be as active as we can on social media and updating people as the month goes along, but we kind of compile all this into a single document at the end of the month and explain what we've done for the month. So just want to thank everybody for joining us here today, and we will see you guys again in the next one.